Gaia, Ivalice, Eos. Worlds steeped in history, separated by their differences, but unified by nature. These are the settings for some of the most monumental sagas in gaming. These are the settings for Final Fantasy. Each chronicle invokes something new, creating a run of games to keep their audience hooked. While the developers have made it their mission to separate the titles, what if there are secretly links between them? If these worlds are indeed connected, this turns the franchise on its head. But is that a good thing for a series over 3 decades in the making? For the uninitiated, you'd be forgiven for not immediately jumping to the conclusion that the Final Fantasy series isn't a continuation of a larger, further-reaching story. They do all share similar DNA after all. The gameplay falls into a few categories, which is repeated across the franchise. It's familiar and recognizable. There are repeated concepts across a lot of the games too. You'll be able to wield gunblades, summon the primal Ifrit, or hop across country on a chocobo in several installments. In some cases, the game worlds share a common similarity. The 7th and 9th titles are both set on Gaia, which is the same place, right? Again, you'd be forgiven for thinking that, because it makes logical sense. But that's not how the series' universe works. Gaia, for instance, is similar in name only. It's just a common, generic name, like Terra or Earth. Outside of that, the games don't exist in the same world, build off one another, or have anything at all in common. The games do exist in the same universe, but outside of that, Square Enix has been adamant on wiping the slate clean and building a new creation each time. New characters with new goals undertake a new quest and go on their own individual character arcs. This has given the developers the freedom to pursue each concept in wild and imaginative ways, without worry of crossover, overlap, or contradictions between games. And that's the general consensus, and the word from the devs themselves. Although they might be adding in a bit more than they're letting on. They aren't shining a light on it, but they're making connections. Now, there are dozens of Easter eggs across the games paying homage to each other, but that's less about a complex web of history entwining a world, and more about the devs giving a nod to their loyal fans. No, among these Easter eggs, there are a few details which carry a bit more weight. And there's one I want to look at in particular. It has a lot to do with one of the fan favourites of the series, 7. One of the looming, inescapable presences in the game is the Shinra Electric Power Company. These are the guys that are providing electricity to the world through Mako energy. They could be seen as progressives, but in reality, they're pretty evil. That classic mega-corporation turned military power holding nations to ransom shtick. Probably where Tesla is heading within the next 20 years. At the head of Shinra's tyrannical rule is its president, also called Shinra. Now, no one really thought much about this for quite a while. Power-hungry people name things after themselves all the time. Trump Towers, anyone? Not much thought was put into it until 6 years later with the release of Final Fantasy X-2. And we were introduced to another Shinra, not a ruthless megalomaniac CEO, merely an inquisitive al-Bhed boy serving on your airship, the Celsius. The name is enough to set off a few bells, but as we've seen with Gaia and Gaia, Square Enix have shown that having the same name doesn't mean two things are connected in the slightest. Shinra's role in the story is a little more than being a nod to the earlier iteration. His involvement is a reference to what is to come and what has already happened. Upon investigating data around the Farplane, an underground realm in the Spira that acts as a resting point for the dead, Shinra becomes obsessed with the place. If properly utilised, he theorised it could be extracted and provide a constant and consistent source of energy. Electricity from the souls of the dead? It's all very Victor Frankenstein, isn't it? The parallels between Shinra the electricity obsessed and Shinra the obsessive electricity mogul are starting to become apparent, but the evidence keeps mounting. As revealed in X-2 The Last Mission, Shinra the Younger has piqued the interest in other characters and received financial backing from Rin to further his understanding and experiments on the far plane. Stepping down as a gullwing, he throws himself into his research in the hopes of harnessing its power. Yuna speculates on the potential of Shinra's research. He could build a city full of light, one that never sleeps. And that, right there, plain as day, is a reference to the setting of Final Fantasy VII, Midgar. But Shinra wouldn't build his city of light, but somewhere down the line, an electric baton would be passed on to Shinra, the other Shinra. It would be easier if we could differentiate them more. So it goes, Shinra 10-2, lots more generations of Shinra, onto the current Shinra, president of the Shinra Electric Power Company. Simple, right? So the connection was made in one direction, but it wouldn't be reinforced in the games for another 17 years. Now, in the Final Fantasy VII Remake, if you go to the 60th floor of the Shinra headquarters, lo and behold, you'll see a very familiar face. Whether that's the Shinra from 10-2, or one of the other future generations of Shinranians that would follow, it doesn't matter. It supports the theory. But let's return back to the whole ethos of the franchise. Different worlds existing in the same universe, and timelines that are millennia away from lining up. And the same thing is true for the timelines between 7 and 10-2. While there's some ambiguity, Cloud's adventures ploughing through Midgard happened somewhere between 1,000 years and 10,000 years after Tidus and the company's saga on Spira. And there's another point. Midgard is on Gaia. It's a completely different planet. So Shinra may have sired generations of electrically inquisitive offspring, but how did they get to another planet to bring the power of the far plane to Gaia? I might be able to answer that. So in Advent Children and the Dirge of Cerberus, there's a character called Sid. He's got an airship, Shera, named after his wife. Now, it's initially believed that Sid built this vessel himself, but it's later revealed that it's powered by an ancient device from another world. Could this be the proprietary technology that allowed one of Shinra's offspring to take the flight and migrate to other planets? Quite possibly, yes. But don't just take my word for it. This isn't just the babbling of myself and others on the internet. This isn't even a coincidence that I'm digging deep into. It was all planned out. Kind of. Take it from the game's producer, Yoshinori Kitase. In a deep dive interview back in 2019, he alluded to a secret history surrounding the character of Shinra. He also told fans that both 7 and 10 take place in the same world, to a degree. The big reveal could only be made by the game's scenario writer, Kazushige Nojima, but like everyone on the development team, he's always been cryptic. In fact, the whole connection between the two games may have come out as an accident. When he anecdotally mentioned the worlds in the two games looked similar, he created a tenuous link, but it was never to be taken too seriously. Then, when it was officially stated in the Ultimania, that is the kind of Encyclopedia Britannica of the Final Fantasy world, the anecdote became a reality, and one blown completely out of proportion. Well, it might have gotten away from Nojima-san, but it's apparent others on the team took the idea and ran with it. They looped this crazy multi-generational character arc between the games and had it come back full circle nearly 2 decades later. And that's just one of the links between games that we'd previously believed to be completely isolated. Are there more? Of course. But to completely break them all down, well, we'd be here for days. I'm more interested in what these connections mean, and whether a connected Final Fantasy universe is better than a solitary instanced one. On one hand, having these little links that may be dubious, well, it's thrilling to discover them. Having a small detail that's 10,000 years in the making, It makes you feel like the universe is bigger than the sum of its parts. Not to mention, it's a great reward for players who know the games inside and out. It takes nothing away from the player who walks past a picture in the game and doesn't think twice. But for those who've been loyal fans of the franchise for decades and get the chance to dig deep into their Final Fantasy knowledge banks, well, it feels good. Makes you feel like you've worked for that little nugget of information. Yet the game's creators are resistant to giving too much away. It's a fine line to tread. This instance, well, it doesn't impact much. From a designer's point of view, if you're too gung-ho with creating several tangible links between games, you'll soon be contradicting yourself. What happens in one game then impacts another, and the same rules have to apply. It's creatively stifling. Yes, it can lead to a richer, fuller-feeling universe, but when each game's world is already fleshed out further and fuller than most franchises, do they really need the extra world building? Not to mention they have a franchise so steeped in history and world building, which has a completely open-ended point of entry. Ask anyone what their first foray into the series was, and most will have a different answer. They'll play the one that appeals to them, and then go from there. There are other franchises that have lasted as long as Final Fantasy, but they've mainly built that legacy on the backs of their characters. To discard icons and create new ones with each and every game, it's a bold strategy, which pays off well for the Japanese developers. They play a delicate game with their inter-game connections. They cast out a few possibilities and shed a definitive light on even less. They're having fun with it, but they also offer their fans that same gratification. It's a fine line between throwing out some bait and trapping yourself in a self-made paradox, but Square Enix have trod it delicately. But then again, do you expect any less from a developer who's been making gaming history since 1987?